I never figured that turning a wrench on a Saturday morning would lead to a full-blown neighborhood war. But that's the funny thing about petty tyrants. They have a way of turning the simplest pleasures into battlegrounds. For me, that pleasure was the low, satisfying rumble of a 30-year-old V8 engine. And the tyrant was a woman named Carol. My name is Jack, and for the better part of my life, I've been a mechanic. My father started Jack's Auto Repair just outside the town limits 50 years ago, and I took over the family business when he retired. We're the only shop for a 50-mile radius, a fact that's less about brilliant business strategy and more about the simple reality of living in a place where people value open space over strip malls. I live in a community called Maple Creek Estates, a quiet collection of houses that, until recently, had always operated on a simple principle of mutual respect. You didn't blast music at midnight, and I didn't complain about your slightly too tall grass. The homeowners association was mostly a formality. It existed to make sure the sign at the entrance didn't fall over, and to pay for mowing the small patch of green they called a park. Dues were $100 a year, and the annual meeting was usually attended by 5 people, 3 of whom were on the board and just wanted to get it over with so they could go home and watch television. It was peaceful, functional, and blessedly unobtrusive. Then Carol moved in. She arrived from some big city, bringing with her a level of aggressive enthusiasm for regulation that our quiet community had never encountered. She saw our sleepy, informal HOA not as a simple utility, but as a dormant superpower, just waiting for a firm hand to awaken it. Within 6 months of moving in, she'd attended every meeting, volunteered for every committee, and used a mixture of sheer persistence and bewildering jargon to get herself elected president. Her platform was simple and ominous, protecting our property values. The changes started small, like a slow leaking faucet. First, it was a memo about trash cans. They could no longer be visible from the street, except on collection day. Then came the regulations on holiday decorations, complete with approved color palettes and a strict timeline for their display and removal. People grumbled. It was annoying, a solution in search of a problem, but it was easier to comply than to fight. We dragged our bins behind fences and took down our Christmas lights the day after New Year's. We tolerated it, assuming her manic energy would eventually burn itself out. We were wrong. The day it all started for me was a perfect Saturday in early fall. The air was crisp, the sky was a deep cloudless blue, and I had a whole day to dedicate to my true passion. A 1969 Ford Mustang I'd been restoring for the better part of a decade. It was my therapy, my art project, my escape from the daily grind of fixing other people's problems. I had rolled it out of the garage and into the driveway, where the light was better. The hood was up, my tools were laid out neatly on a rolling cart, and I was meticulously tuning the carburetor, listening for that perfect, smooth idle. I was so lost in the work that I didn't hear her approach. It was the sharp, disapproving scrape of sensible shoes on my concrete driveway that finally broke my concentration. I looked up from the engine bay to see Carol standing there, arms crossed, holding a clipboard like a scepter. She wore a beige pantsuit that seemed designed to broadcast an aura of joyless authority. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "we have a problem." I wiped a smudge of grease from my hand with a rag and stood up straight. "Morning, Carol. Is everything all right?" She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on her clipboard. "It has come to my attention that you are performing vehicle maintenance on your property." I glanced at the Mustang, then back at her, a little confused. "Well, yes, it's my car. It's my driveway. It's Saturday." I thought that covered all the relevant facts. She gave a thin, pitying smile. "According to the Maple Creek Estates Covenants, Section 7, Paragraph B, and I quote, 'No vehicle maintenance or repair, whether of a commercial or personal nature, shall be conducted on any property outside of a fully enclosed garage structure.'" I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. She was serious. I'd lived here for 15 years and had worked on my cars in the driveway 100 times without a single complaint. "Carol, that rule has never been enforced. It was meant to stop people from running chop shops in their front yards, not for a guy tuning his hobby car." "An unenforced rule is still a rule," she chirped, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of absolute certainty. "We are raising the standards of this community, Mr. Miller, and that means adherence to the bylaws as they are written. This is your official verbal warning." She made a check mark on her sheet. Then, with a flourish, she tore off a pre-printed slip of paper from the bottom and handed it to me. It was a formal written warning, citing the specific covenant I had violated. "The next infraction," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a grave secret, "will result in a $200 fine. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend." She turned and marched back down the driveway, her mission accomplished. I stood there, holding the ridiculous piece of paper, the beautiful silence of the morning shattered by the shrill sound of petty bureaucracy. The war had begun. For a few weeks, I tried to be the good neighbor. I pushed the Mustang back into the garage and did my best to work in the cramped, poorly lit space. It was frustrating and took all the joy out of it. The whole point was to be outside, to feel the breeze while I worked. But I valued peace more than I valued convenience, so I complied. I figured if I just laid low, Carol would find some other perceived infraction to fixate on. My optimism was short-lived. A couple of weeks later, I needed to replace a fuel pump. It was a messy job, and I didn't want the gasoline fumes building up inside the garage. I decided on a compromise. I opened the garage door for ventilation but kept the car and all my work inside. It seemed like a reasonable solution. It was not. Less than an hour into the job, an email pinged on my phone. It was from the HOA, which was to say, from Carol. The subject line was Second Notice of Violation, Covenant 7B. The email contained a grainy photograph of my open garage door, with the front of my Mustang barely visible in the shadows. "Mr. Miller," it read, "unsightly mechanical activities were observed to be visible from the street in contravention of the spirit, if not the precise letter, of our community standards. Please consider this your second warning." I felt a hot flash of anger. The spirit of the community standards? She was just making things up now. The fine started the following week. My work truck, which I used for my business but was also my personal vehicle, was parked in my driveway. I'd come home late from a tough job and had left it there overnight. The next afternoon, a $200 fine was taped to my front door for violating a newly minted rule about commercial vehicles being parked in driveways for more than 24 consecutive hours. It was absurd. It was my truck. It was my driveway. I paid the fine, but the resentment was hardening into something colder and more resolute. It soon became clear I wasn't her only target. Carol was on a crusade. She fined the Henderson family, an elderly couple who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, because their visiting nurse had parked with one tire touching the edge of their lawn. She sent a violation notice to the family across the street for their son's basketball hoop, claiming it was a non-permanent structure that degraded the aesthetic harmony of the block. People were getting scared. You could feel the tension in the air. Neighbors who used to wave and chat now just gave tight-lipped nods, afraid of being seen talking to someone who might be on Carol's list. The community spirit that had once defined Maple Creek was being systematically dismantled, one petty violation at a time. The breaking point for me came when I saw Mr. Henderson trying to dig a small trench along his driveway to install a decorative border. He was in his late 80s, and his hands trembled as he held the shovel. "What are you doing, George?" I asked, walking over. He looked up, his face etched with worry. "Carol said if the nurse's car touches the grass one more time, the fine doubles. I figured if I put some bricks here, it'll stop her." Seeing that proud, kind man, who had served in the army and built his own house, reduced to this state of fear by Carol's bullying, solidified my resolve. This wasn't about my car anymore. This was about my home, my neighbors, and the decency of the place I lived. This was a fight I couldn't walk away from. The fines were now piling up, and a certified letter arrived from the HOA's lawyer, a name I didn't recognize. It informed me that I owed over $1,000 in unpaid penalties, and that if I didn't pay within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. That was it. This had moved beyond petty harassment into a genuine threat to my financial security. I knew I needed professional help. I found a lawyer named Dave who specialized in real estate and, more importantly, HOA disputes. He was a gruff, no-nonsense man in his 60s with a healthy skepticism for authority. I laid out the whole story in his cluttered office, showing him the stack of violation notices and the threatening letter. He read through them, his expression growing more grim with each page. "Well, she's a piece of work, I'll give her that," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Technically, the covenants are on her side. They're poorly written and overly broad, which gives a president like her a lot of rope. She can enforce these rules if she applies them consistently." "But she's not," I insisted. "She's targeting people. The board members can park their boats in their driveways, but I get a fine for my work truck." Dave nodded slowly. "That's your angle. Selective enforcement. It's hard to prove, but it's a start. I want you to document everything. Every interaction, every fine, every car you see that violates a rule but doesn't get a notice. Get photos, get times and dates. We need to build a case that she's not a rule keeper, she's a bully with a grudge." He paused, looking at me over his glasses. "But cases like this can drag on and get expensive. The best way to win a fight with an HOA isn't in court, it's by finding leverage. You need to dig into the HOA's business. The bylaws give you the right to inspect their financial records. Start there." Following Dave's advice, I sent a formal, notarized request to the HOA board for the complete financial records for the past 2 years, as was my right as a homeowner. Carol's response was delayed, and when it finally came, laughably inadequate. The documents were a mess of redacted lines, vague categories, and missing pages. It was a blatant attempt to stonewall me, but it was also a huge red flag. People who have nothing to hide don't act like they're hiding something. I started talking to my neighbors more, not just about the fines, but about the HOA itself. I gathered their stories, their frustrations, and their own violation notices. A pattern emerged. The fines were disproportionately levied against older residents on fixed incomes and families with young children, the people least likely to have the resources or the energy to fight back. As I sifted through the partial budget documents Carol had sent, one line item jumped out at me. It was under the heading Community Maintenance, and it was a massive expense, nearly a third of our entire annual budget. The payment was made monthly to a company I'd never heard of, Prestige Community Solutions. The description was vague, just groundskeeping and vehicle fleet management. I knew for a fact that a local kid mowed the park lawn for cash, and our vehicle fleet consisted of a dented 20-year-old pickup truck with a plow attachment that hadn't moved in years, and a small shuttle bus for seniors that was notoriously unreliable. Something was very wrong. A quick search on the state's online business registry was all it took. The world of petty tyranny and the world of corporate filings collided on my computer screen. And in that moment, the entire power dynamic of Maple Creek Estates shifted. I typed Prestige Community Solutions into the search bar and hit enter. The results loaded instantly. It was a registered limited liability company, filed just 8 months prior. My heart began to pound as I clicked on the details. The company had only one listed officer. The address listed for the business was not a commercial garage or an office park. It was a residential address right here in Maple Creek Estates. I knew the address well. It was Carol's house. And the name of the sole registered agent and owner of the company that was receiving a third of our HOA dues? It was her husband, a man who, as far as anyone knew, sold insurance for a living. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling of pure, unadulterated clarity. This was it. This was the leverage Dave had been talking about. It wasn't just selective enforcement or a personal vendetta anymore. This was potential fraud. This was embezzlement. Carol wasn't just a power-hungry administrator. She was using the HOA as her personal piggy bank, funneling our dues into her husband's sham company for services that were clearly not being rendered. The biggest line item under the contract was for emergency vehicle maintenance. It was a detail so beautifully, poetically ironic, that I almost had to laugh. She had been fining me, a professional mechanic, for working on my own car, while simultaneously paying her own fake company a fortune to maintain community vehicles that were, in all likelihood, falling apart from neglect. She had created a problem and then fabricated a corrupt solution, all while positioning herself as the guardian of community standards. I immediately called Dave. I could hear the excitement in his voice as I explained what I'd found. "Jack, this is the whole ball game," he said, a rare note of triumph in his tone. "This is no longer a civil dispute about bylaws. This is a criminal matter. Do not, under any circumstances, show your hand. Don't confront her. Don't even hint that you know." His advice was to wait. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled in 2 weeks. It was the one time all year that the community gathered, and it was the perfect stage. "We're going to let her walk right into it," Dave explained. "She'll be standing up there, feeling powerful, presenting her budget. And you, as a concerned homeowner, are going to stand up and ask some very simple, very direct questions. Let her hang herself with her own rope in front of everyone." The plan was set. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the defeated homeowner. I paid one of the smaller, more recent fines without complaint. I kept my garage door shut tight. I gave Carol a polite, if cool, nod when I saw her on her daily patrols. In the evenings, I worked with Dave and a few trusted neighbors I'd brought into the fold to prepare. We printed out copies of the corporate filing. We prepared a simple presentation, and I did one more piece of due diligence. I walked over to the small, fenced-in area behind the community clubhouse where the HOA's vehicles were kept. The gate was unlocked. The old pickup truck sat rusting. Its tires were not just bald, but cracked with age. I popped the hood. As I suspected, the engine was a disaster of corrosion and neglect. The oil on the dipstick was black sludge. Then I turned to the senior shuttle bus. It was a little newer, but it looked just as sad. I tried the ignition. The engine turned over weakly, coughed twice, and then died with a pathetic groan. It was exactly as I'd suspected. The fleet that Prestige Community Solutions was being paid handsomely to maintain was completely non-functional. The leverage was now a loaded cannon, and the annual meeting was the place we were going to light the fuse. The night of the annual meeting, the community center buzz was different. Usually, these things were sparsely attended, a sad affair with stale cookies and lukewarm coffee. Tonight, the room was packed. Word had spread. The relentless fines, the oppressive atmosphere, and the general feeling of being under siege had mobilized even the most apathetic residents. People were standing along the walls, their faces a mixture of anger and anticipation. They might not have known the specifics of what was coming, but they knew something had to give. Carol stood at the podium at the front of the room, flanked by her 2 loyal but visibly nervous board members. She beamed at the crowd, completely misreading the mood. She probably saw the high turnout as a testament to her successful leadership, a community engaged and eager to hear her vision. She tapped the microphone, and a high-pitched squeal of feedback momentarily silenced the chatter. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice dripping with false cheer. "It's so wonderful to see so many of you taking an active interest in our community's bright future." She droned on for 20 minutes, recapping her accomplishments. She spoke of improved curb appeal, standardized aesthetics, and the successful implementation of policies that had, in her words, maximized property values for all. Then she moved on to the budget. A slide appeared on the projector screen behind her, a confusing mess of numbers. She pointed to a line showing a proposed 5% increase in annual dues. "Now, I know none of us like to see costs go up," she said with a sympathetic pout. "But due to rising maintenance costs and the need to ensure all community assets are kept in pristine working order, this small increase is absolutely essential." Finally, she made her mistake. "Are there any questions about the budget?" A dozen hands shot up, but I was already on my feet. I had positioned myself near the front. I spoke calmly, my voice steady. "Carol, I have a question about a specific line item. The payments to a company called Prestige Community Solutions. It's the single largest expenditure in the budget. Could you tell us a bit more about what services they provide?" Carol's smile tightened. She clearly recognized me as a troublemaker. "Of course, Mr. Miller. Prestige is our fully vetted contractor for groundskeeping and vehicle fleet management. They handle all our essential maintenance needs and provide excellent value." "That's interesting," I said, my voice still level. "I couldn't find a local business listing for them. Could you tell us where they're located?" She faltered for a second. "They are a private contractor. Their location is not relevant." "Well, I found their corporate filing with the state," I said, pulling a piece of paper from my jacket pocket. And it says their primary place of business is 712 Willow Lane. Isn't that your home address, Carol? A collective gasp went through the room. A low murmur started to build. Carol's face went from pale to beet red. That's an outrageous accusation. How dare you? It's not an accusation, I said, walking to the front of the room and placing the document on the projector so the image of her name, her husband's name, and their address filled the screen. It's a public record. The room erupted. Carol banged the gavel on the podium. Order, order! This is a private matter. Mr. Miller is simply bitter because he was fined for violating our rules. I held up my hands to quiet the crowd. It gets worse, I said, my voice rising to be heard over the din. Their contract is primarily for vehicle fleet management. As a mechanic, I was curious about the condition of our fleet. I pulled a set of keys from my pocket and held them up. These are the keys to the senior shuttle bus. I borrowed them this afternoon. The bus won't start. The battery is dead, the alternator is shot, and it hasn't had an oil change in what looks like years. Mr. Henderson missed a doctor's appointment today because of it. I pointed toward the back of the room. And our snowplow truck? It has 4 bald tires, a cracked radiator, and an engine that is seized from neglect. We're paying your husband's company tens of thousands of dollars a year to maintain vehicles that are little more than scrap metal. You haven't been protecting our property values. You've been stealing from us. You've been using our dues to fund your personal lifestyle while letting our community's assets rot. All while you fine an old man because a nurse parked on his lawn. The collapse was total and immediate. Carol stood frozen at the podium, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Her 2 board members looked at her in horror, then at the angry faces in the crowd, and visibly shrank away from her. One of them, a quiet accountant named Frank, stood up and took the microphone. I move for the immediate removal of the president pending a full, independent audit of all HOA finances, he said, his voice shaking but clear. Seconded, shouted a dozen people at once. The motion passed with a roar of unanimous approval. Carol, finally snapping out of her stupor, grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, shouting about lawsuits and ungrateful people. No one paid her any mind. Someone had already quietly called the police, and an officer was waiting for her in the hallway to take a statement. The reign of terror was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The interim board, led by Frank the accountant, hired a forensic auditor who uncovered the full extent of the fraud. Carol and her husband had embezzled nearly $80,000 from the HOA over the course of a year. The district attorney's office took one look at the evidence and filed charges. Faced with an ironclad case, they both pleaded guilty. Her husband, who it turned out had a prior conviction for financial fraud in another state, received a sentence of 18 months in county jail. Carol was given 5 years of probation, a hefty fine, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the community she had plundered. To cover their legal fees and the restitution, they were forced to sell their house. The for sale sign went up a month after the meeting, and they were gone a few weeks after that, disappearing from Maple Creek as quickly and as toxically as they had arrived. For me, the vindication was immediate. The interim board held an emergency meeting and voted to void every fine Carol had issued in the past year. The lien on my property was canceled before it was ever formally filed. They offered me a public apology, which I accepted, and then they did something that made me smile. They offered me the official, and now fully legitimate, contract to service the community vehicles. I gave them a fair price, my standard rate, with a 10% discount for my neighbors. My first job was getting the senior shuttle back on the road, which I did the very next day. The HOA itself underwent a radical transformation. We held a special election and voted in a new board of reasonable, level-headed people, including Mr. Henderson's daughter, a retired school teacher. Their first act was to conduct a full review of the bylaws. They threw out dozens of the absurd, restrictive rules Carol had implemented. The new guiding principle was simple: common sense and mutual respect. The HOA went back to being what it was always meant to be, a quiet background utility, not a neighborhood police state. The atmosphere in Maple Creek changed almost overnight. People started talking to each other again. Kids' basketball hoops reappeared. We had a community barbecue in the park to celebrate, and the feeling of relief and camaraderie was palpable. We had taken our community back. A few years have passed since then. Maple Creek Estates is more vibrant than ever. The HOA, now a positive force, helps organize block parties and looks after the elderly residents. Property values have indeed gone up, not because of draconian rules, but because it's known throughout the area as a genuinely friendly and well-managed place to live. The story of the corrupt HOA president became a local legend, a cautionary tale about what happens when you let a bully take charge. I saw Carol one last time, about a year ago. I was in the next town over, picking up a specialty part, and stopped at a discount grocery store. There she was, working as a cashier. She looked smaller, worn down by the world. Her beige uniform was a sad echo of the power suits she used to wear. She scanned my items, her expression vacant. If she recognized me, she gave no sign. I felt a brief, surprising pang of pity for her. There was no triumph in seeing her like this, only a quiet sadness. She had built her own prison of bitterness and greed, and now she was living in it. I never set out to be a community champion. I'm a mechanic. I like solving problems with my hands, not with motions and meetings. I just wanted to be left alone to work on my old car in my own driveway. But when a petty tyrant tries to take that away, and then goes after your neighbors, you learn that sometimes you have to get your hands dirty in a different way. You have to stand up, not just for yourself, but for the simple principle that a community should be about connection, not control. This morning, it's another perfect Saturday. My Mustang, now fully restored and gleaming in the sun, is parked in the driveway. My garage door is wide open, and my tools are laid out beside me. I'm just doing a little fine-tuning, enjoying the peace. The sound of the engine is a low, contented rumble, a sound of freedom and normalcy. Across the street, my neighbor waves, and I wave back. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's home. And that's a state of being worth fighting for.